Serious, parents of Reddit, what was a legit reason why you didn't let your son/daughter have that friend over/go to a sleepover? One of our friends has a granddaughter who was treated horribly by her parents. They ignored her and just locked her in her room. When she was young, it wasn't that bad when she came over. She would act out from time to time, but she was just so happy to be somewhere else, and you could tell. It made us feel wonderful that we could provide that, and we did so often. We tried to basically make our house a second home for her. However, as she got older, she started acting out more and more. It reached the point when she was 7, that she was stealing money from our child's piggy bank. She got into my wife's purse and stole money. We then caught her stealing toys to take home with her. She would run around saying "fuck you, fuck Jesus" and all sorts different ways to say fuck. We'd take them to the park and she would get into literal fist-throwing fights with other kids. These sort of things started happening every time she was over. It went from "we feel so great that we can give her a break from her troubled home life" to "sorry, but she can't come over anymore," and we felt awful. But she had turned into a literal terror, and nothing we tried would get her out of it. The turning point was when she smacked our youngest across the head with a wooden toy and he needed to get stitches. We tried to get CPS involved, but they basically said as long as she's going to school, getting fed, and not being physically or sexually abused, there is nothing we can do. Last I heard, she is in prison for assault and drug charges. My friend and her sister could sleep at our house, but my sister and I couldn't sleep at theirs. In college I figured it out. Their house was a fire trap. Pathways between stuff like a hoarder's house, the bathtub was full of dirty water constantly, you had to move stuff just to use the toilet, the stairs to the basement, where we would have slept, covered in clothes and only one way out of the basement, the windows were too small to crawl out of if you were larger than an average 2-year-old. Saw the inside of the house years later and it was like a different house. They had a piano in the living room that I'd never seen before because it was just covered in hoarder crap. My daughter was the one excluded. So thought I'd add it as almost like a PSA. My kid has alopecia. For those that don't know, it's an autoimmune disease that causes your immune system to treat your hair follicles as a threat. Boom. Hair loss. Hers is stress-induced, and she went completely bald, eyelashes and eyebrows too, for almost 2 years. One of her friend's parents wouldn't let her go over there because she said she didn't want my daughter to spread her disease to her kids. She said this to my kid's face. For one, that's uncalled for. She had my phone number, call me. 2, it isn't contagious. My daughter cried for days. Not the parent but the sister. My brother had a girlfriend in high school, his first ever real girlfriend, and my mom did not like her. All three of us went to the same high school together, and this girl glommed onto me as super sweet buddy BFFs when she got with my brother. But my mom didn't trust the girl, she didn't like the girl, and her dismay and apprehensions mounted the longer my brother knew her. We're only talking about a couple of weeks to a few months. But it culminated in my brother hanging out at her house to visit her for dinner one evening. And then declaring he wasn't coming home, that he was going to stay there for the night. And apparently her parents were backing him up on this on the phone. My mom wasn't having that. She stuffed me in the car and peeled out of the driveway. It wasn't just my brother being defiant, he'd done that before. Something felt really off about this to her. We got to the apartment complex where the family lived, and I helped her locate the apartment. I was in the car because I had been there before. I in no way wanted to be part of this situation whatsoever. Nonetheless, I go up to the door and knock because we figure he will come out and talk to me. He does come out, he talks, my mom talks, the girlfriend comes out and starts screaming. At this point I've locked myself in the car and rolled up the windows because I don't want to be any part of this. I remember her parents standing on the balcony and yelling down at my mom and my brother below. We qualified for Jerry Springer at that point. It was all beyond ridiculous. Eventually my mom got my brother back in the car. She made me sit in the back seat so he could sit in the front seat, and I remember arguing about the fact I should get to sit in the front seat because I wasn't the one who had caused all the problems that night. Ha ha ha. Oh Jesus. Well, she got him in the front seat and put me in the back and gave him a reaming from 6 ways to Sunday all the way home. I don't know specifics, I just remember her saying things like, "It doesn't add up, and there's something wrong here, and this just isn't right." Parents don't co-sign their teenage daughter doing that and back the guy up in defiance to his parent when his parents said no. That there was something wrong with these people. There was something wrong with these people. 7.5 to 8 months later the girl gave birth to a baby. She was pregnant, she knew she was pregnant, and she wanted my brother to think he was the father. He and she had never had sex, that was going to be their night. Her parents were abetting her in the ruse. For a couple of years after that, when my brother wanted to do something stupid, all my mom had to do was look at him and say the girl's name out loud. Her name wasn't Miranda, but let's say it was. She would just look at my brother and say Miranda? Then he would instantly stop pursuing whatever stupid thing he was trying to talk his way into getting to do. I talked to my brother recently, and apparently Miranda went around school for the rest of the school year, at least until the baby came, I guess, telling everyone that I was a lesbian and she had a lesbian affair with me. Or something. I have no idea. The news never got back to me, but apparently my brother knew all about it and he said everyone in the school was talking about it. It did explain some weird things people said to me, but I never made the connection at the time. Not that what she said matters to me today. Especially since I never knew about it at the time. So there's a story of a parent pulling their son out of an extremely toxic situation she had bad feelings about. Early 90s, the kids on the street decided to have a camp out in someone's front yard. Little fire, ghost stories, s'mores, tents, the whole bit. Middle of the night, one of the kids starts screaming that someone is on him. Turns out another kid that just moved in had stripped down naked and smeared shit all over himself and attempted to do something to a sleeping kid. Parents all came out after hearing the screaming. Poop kid took a dump in the street and threw some at the parents of yet another kid. Again, it was the early 90s in the Midwest, so this display didn't go well. The parents went crazy. I never saw the poop king again and his family moved away. Kid has severe behavior issues and is super violent and destructive. The one and only time he came to our house, he threw all of my daughter's underwear around the room to embarrass her. The worst incident happened at school though, when he tried to choke her out. They were 5 years old at the time. I feel bad for the kid and all, and I know his mom is doing everything she can to help him, but I just can't allow that kind of behavior around my kids and in my home. I no longer allowed my son's best friend to come to our place or for him to go over to his after the best friend's mom reported us to the police as harboring a runaway. This was after the best friend had been tossed out of his mom's house and told to spend the night sleeping outside, and she'd refused our phone calls to find out what was going on. So yes, I wasn't going to let a 16-year-old spend the night in 30-degree weather with nowhere to go. Sue me. The cops showed up, said she'd reported us as harboring a runaway. We explained what was happening and got treated like dirt and told that from now on we had to have full permission from the mom. Fine. We urged my son's friend to go to the police, report to them what was happening, and left it at that. The mom tried to apologize 3 days later as being off her meds and say it was okay for my son to go to their house and vice versa, and I politely refused and hung up while she was screaming at me. I'd always been kind of uncomfortable with the woman and that just sealed it. They were still friends at school, but there were no more hanging out at either one's house, and I explained why and they both agreed to the rules. The son is in the military now and doing quite well and no longer has contact with his mother. Gee, I wonder why. My son started public school after going to Montessori school in 4th grade. I met another mom whose son started from private school the same year. My son was weird about befriending her son and I wasn't sure why. Shortly into the friendship, the single mom started asking if her kid could sleep over every Friday. I was fine with that. Then it became school nights. Not so fond of that. Her son started showing up at 6:30 a.m. before school when we were all still sleeping. My son made other friends and just tolerated friendship with her kid. We explained that his home life wasn't great and he didn't have anyone most of the time. Halfway through the following school year, the kid brought a knife to school and pulled it on my son. The school did nothing, Baltimore, so I contacted her to let her know what happened. Her response was that he was such a goof. My son was rightfully avoiding him at this point, and the mom had the audacity to contact me and ask if we could watch her son for half a school week because she really wanted to go on spring break out of state with friends. She is in her late 30s getting a PhD in psychology. I had to tell her she and her kid were never going to be invited again. He is destructive and has some unmedicated issues that affect his interaction with other kids. The kid doesn't play, he just upturns bins, throws things around and breaks stuff. My son is growing out of this kid. The kid is very sheltered and doesn't have the behavioral therapy that the doctors recommend, so he is just too much for my oldest and now my second to deal with. So that means the requests for him to come over are drying up. They really have nothing in common anymore. I had to hide our Xbox anytime he came over after he broke multiple games and couldn't understand why the shattered CD wouldn't work and why we were mad. I was a foster mom of a girl that had lice that was resistant to all attempts to eradicate them. She had waist-length, thick black hair. It was a nightmare. I even ended up with lice eventually, And I too had long, thick, dark hair. I wouldn't let her go to sleepovers with our family kids, and it was so hard to justify that we were not singling her out for being foster. I just was trying to be responsible and made sure the parents all knew and asked them to make excuses that would not include lice. I didn't want that horror from her past life to follow her around. I know the band kid. He would break shit, hide from you, hit the dogs, and he'd be rude and physically abusive to my grandmother. He'd pinch her for literally no reason, and probably little kid punched her a few times. He would scream for no reason, and no matter what you did for punishment he'd ignore it. My mom physically threw him and all his toys out of our house one day after he hit a couple dogs and pinched my grandmother in quick succession, and he just stood outside and fake cried, telling us to let him back in. We live in the middle of nowhere with no neighbors or traffic. He wasn't in any danger, and if he actually thought about it he could have found his way back in. I think like an hour of peace went by and she finally let him back in. Stories from school include walking out of class and into another and then beating a kid up, pulling a girl down by her ponytail and wailing on her, attempting to stab a kid with scissors, and being such a handful the teacher tried to get him moved to a special needs school. He was 5 when all of that was going on. He's 6 now and medicated with therapy and doing insanely better. His mom is moving cross country with him to be with her family so they can help look after him. He was banned from a lot of school events and didn't have many friends, but that's turning around now. I'm the kid in this story. When I was growing up, there was a girl that lived across the street, about a year younger than me. I'm a guy, which plays a role in a bit. Her parents were addicted to, I believe, meth. I one day, as a kid, saw her dad on the roof of his house grilling hamburgers while doing push-ups. Yeah. Anyways, after that, my mom would not let me stay at this girl's house, although she would still stay the night at mine. However, as we got older, my mom stopped letting her stay at our house also, because she was afraid we might start having sex, and she was especially afraid the girl might use sex/pregnancy with me as a way to get out of her home situation. That's the reason my mom gave to me anyways, when I was an adult, obviously. Sadly, the girl's life never really improved. When we got to high school, she started dating this older guy who apparently doesn't know how to yield on a left turn, and she died in the resulting crash. Years later, now that I'm older and can look back on it, the whole situation makes me really sad. She never even made it to 16. I hated not letting the child sleep over, but that would have meant that my child would have wanted to sleep over at his house. His mother was living with a very abusive man who raised every single hair on my neck. This man taped off areas where my son's friend could walk and sit, ration food, etc. I was not about to let my son be in that environment. The friend started acting out from abuse. I had already talked to the school counselor about my suspicions and CPS was involved. It was hard to explain to a child of 8 why this friend couldn't come over. I was a situation that set off my early warning senses. We were staying at the house of the daughter of my in-laws' friends. She had a 3-year-old son. My daughter was 5. They played well together, but I got some weird vibes that told me that my daughter shouldn't be crashing in the living room in a sleeping bag. I had her sleep with my wife in the guest bed while I slept on the couch. I kept a close watch on the kids the rest of the evening. The next day as we were leaving, the 3-year-old basically tackled my daughter. He was big, she was very small, and tried to mount and hump her on the floor. I extracted her and told him that wasn't appropriate. My daughter laughed it off as him trying to wrestle with her. Once in the car I told my wife under no circumstances would our daughter ever be allowed back in that house, ever. She agreed. We later learned that the then boyfriend of the woman with the son used to let the boy watch hardcore porn with him. Mom found out when CPS got involved.